Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Became a Dark Hero? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
It's best you give up. A child of only 4 years old watched the doctor in front of him with a shocked face carved into the rock for a few seconds. The room fell into a deep silence. His mother was with him and looked at him with worry before calling the doctor. "Doctor, you mean there's something wrong? Every other child at his kindergarten has manifested, but Izuku still hasn't." The doctor sighed and then told Izuku why he hadn't shown any quirk yet. He said that people who didn't have a quirk had 2 joints in their pinky toe, while people who did had a quirk had an extra joint. Izuku looked shocked and had his eyes fixed on the doctor, but he wasn't paying attention to what was being said. The man's words were still playing over and over in his mind. "I don't have a quirk. I can't be a hero. I can't be like All Might." A loud laugh and the image of a big man with blonde hair and a big smile rattled through his mind. He didn't even notice that he had dropped his All Might action figure because his hands were so small. He was thinking so much that he didn't hear his mother ask, what?" until she put her hand on his shoulder and surprised him a little. With worry in her eyes, his mother asked, "Honey, are you okay?" Probably he is still shocked by the news. "Ma'am, you just have to give him some time, but now I need to talk to you privately about your condition," the doctor said with a knowing look. Inko sighed and put on a sad face. "Honey, could you please wait for mommy in the waiting room? I need to talk to the doctor for a moment, and then we'll go buy the things we need to make a good katsudon for dinner, okay?" Izuku put his shoes back on without saying a word. He walked out of the room in silence, his mouth closed in a thin line but his eyes still wide open in shock. He walked slowly to the small waiting room and sat down on a chair. He didn't even notice that he was the only person there. He thought that. A calm male voice to his right asked, "What's wrong, young one?" This surprised him. The little boy took a deep breath and looked at the person who was speaking with scared eyes. He saw that it was just a man in a black cloak and dark gloves who was carrying a silver cane with a glass skull on the end of it. The man looked to be in his late 40s, and his blonde hair was styled very well. Izuku looked away right away after noticing the man's calm blue eyes. Those eyes made him feel a little scared. As Izuku looked at the floor with tears in his eyes, he said, "The doctor told me I don't have a quirk. I can't be a hero." I see. Indeed, in the world in which we live, not having a quirk can be incredibly disadvantageous. The man nodded before tapping the floor with his stick. "You look like a smart child, so let me ask you something. Do you think there is only one way to get a quirk?" It was hard for Izuku, who was still young, to understand what he was saying as he looked at him. He was only a kid, didn't have a quirk, and was no match for his friends, but his mind was already sharp enough to pick up on the hidden meaning in that question. The man wasn't too old or too young, so he had to know something about quirks. There was only one answer to his question, then. "There are more?" Izuku smiled at him. "Yes, there are more ways to get a quirk. The most common way is to get it from your parents, at the age of 4, or develop a completely new type of quirk, always around that age. However, what many scientists and doctors ignore is that there are other means to obtain a quirk. In fact, there are quirks that can be passed down from owner to a new owner as if they were a simple object, but there are also special quirks that can give quirk to other people. The list goes on." His shock had worn off, and Izuku looked at him in awe. "Do you mean that I can get a quirk too?" He chuckled a bit. "Of course you can, you just need to find a way to obtain such power for yourself. I am sure that, in due course, you will gain an incredibly powerful quirk." Izuku jumped up and bowed to the man, thanking him for what he said, just like his mother had taught him. His face lit up like a Christmas tree. Izuku's mom also told him not to talk to strangers, but he had forgotten that quickly. His mother walked up to him with a confused look on her face and asked, "Honey, why are you bowing?" I was thanking this. Mister?" Izuku asked. When he realized the man was gone, his face went from happy to confused. The kid quickly got over being confused when he turned to his mom and said, "Mommy, I can be a hero too. I can get a quirk." Inko gave her son a sad smile and thought that what he said was an easy way for him to deal with the fact that he didn't have any quirks. She took his hand and walked toward the exit while saying nice things to him to keep him from getting upset. "I'm sure you'll do well, honey. Now let's go, we need to get dinner ready." Izuku yelled with a big smile, "Yes, katsudon for dinner." He and his mother didn't notice the blonde man with the cold smile sitting in the waiting room. The features on his face were slowly changing into those of a demon. 3 days later at Midoriya's house, Izuku said in a low voice as he looked at a video of All Might saving accident victims. "He's smiling. He always smiles." The little boy or girl nodded to himself and looked at a notebook next to the screen. It was open to the first page and had a few simple words written on it. "Find a powerful quirk. I just need to figure out how to get it, and then I'll be like All Might." The kid thought this as he left the room to get a glass of water. The wall clock that was hanging there exactly at midnight caught his eye as he went down the stairs to the front door. "Is it really that late? I didn't notice it," Izuku thought as he looked at the time. "Why didn't Mom come call me? It makes her mad when I stay up late." At the bottom of the stairs, he saw that the TV in the living room was still on. He then looked into the room and saw that his mother was sleeping on the couch. The woman looked calm, but Izuku could tell her face wasn't because she had never seen her smile. At least before it was found out that he didn't have a quirk. When the kid went to turn off the TV so as not to wake up his mom, he saw a letter on the floor between the couch and the coffee table. Izuku grabbed it right away out of curiosity, but when he looked at it, he saw a bunch of words that he didn't bother to figure out what they meant. He was still only 4 years old. Izuku thought, that's the name of the doctor. He could understand a word now and then. "I don't understand. What is this? Quirk cancer? It might be important if it's in a letter with the doctor's name on it." Because Izuku wanted to know what that letter was about, he left the living room in silence and went back to the study with the computer still on. He quickly typed in words that seemed important, like quirk cancer, and what he saw stopped his heart. Found 5 years after the first quirk. This cancer shows up in all quirk holders without discrimination. There are no symptoms that a patient can notice until it is too late. Izuku took a deep breath and shook his hand on the mouse. There are more than 1 million victims to date, and there is still no cure for this type of cancer. This disease doesn't seem to be able to be cured by even the quirks of the world's best doctors, and scientists are still working on a cure. He slowly scrolled down the page, as if it had a life of its own. The last words of the paragraph stopped his heart. 100% rate of lethality. Playground near Midoriya's house, after a few days. "Hey, did you hear? It looks like Deku doesn't have a quirk." A kid laughed as he and some other kids played together. The other kids looked at Izuku, who was sitting alone not far away, and then they laughed like their friend. A second kid with bat wings asked, "Wasn't it him who said he wanted to be like All Might?" "Yeah, now he can't even become a hero." "Oh well, he's always been weak, isn't it, Kachan?" asked a third person with long purple hair as they looked at their new blonde friend who had just joined them after some parents praised his quirk. The kid looked at Izuku with an expressionless face and then shrugged. "Who cares? If he's weak, it doesn't matter to me. Let's go play heroes and villains." The other kids cheered and followed the blonde kid, leaving Izuku all by himself. What they didn't know, though, was that Izuku was staring at the ground with a blank expression because he had learned something terrible about his mother. She had a disease that could not be cured. When Izuku learned about that disease, he put the letter back where it belonged so as not to scare his mother. But when she woke up, he saw that Inko wasn't as alive as she usually was. It was a much worse chance for a kid like him than finding out he didn't have any quirks. Besides that, the thought of not having a mother for the rest of his life had entered his mind, which kept him up for hours worrying about things that would never go away. A man to his right said, "I see that even today you are morally on the ground, young Izuku." The sound of the voice made him almost jump out of his skin. Izuku looked up and saw the same blonde man sitting next to him on the bench. "Why you?" he asked. Why are you here? Wait. How do you know my name? I never told you." The man had a small smile. "I like walking during the day when I have no commitments. As I passed through here I noticed you sitting there alone, but you were so taken by your thoughts that you did not hear me coming. As for the name, I went to the same doctor as you the other day and he was still filling in documents about you, and I got to read your name." Izuku looked back at the ground and said, "Oh, I see. Sorry about that. Judging by your face, I can imagine that something terrible happened." He looked at Izuku. Does it concern the fact of not having a quirk? At first, Izuku shook his head slowly. I want to get a quirk, but my mom. He sniffed a few times. She's sick, and her illness can't be cured. The man looked back at him and nodded solemnly. Quirk cancer, right? How? Izuku asked him in shock. The blond man tapping the ground with his cane said, in this world, there is only one disease that can't be cured by any of the many quirks that are already known. That is quirk cancer. It's really a terrible disease. The thing about cancer is the time it takes. The toll it takes on loved ones. Lives that are changed. Plans that have to be changed. He looked down at Izuku, who was staring at him carefully. Izuku, what if I could help your mother? Izuku was so shocked that he almost lost his eyes. Why you can? But on the internet it says that nobody knows a cure. That's true, but it is also said that no doctor or scientist has succeeded in finding it. There is no mention of anyone outside those two branches of research, he said with a small grin. The truth is that there are some quirks in this world that could be of great help to humanity, but the people who possess them do not come forward for fear of being targeted by unwanted people and, fortunately for you, I am one of those people. Really? Your quirk can help my mom? Izuku yelled through tears in his eyes. Of course I can. I can even give you a quirk, the blond man said with a strange smile as he pulled out a scroll. But you have to pay a price for my quirk to work properly. Izuku let out a loud gulp as he looked at the scroll. He was excited about the idea of having a quirk and being able to save his mother, but everything came with a cost. What's the price? Oh, I'll take, the man said, looking around for a moment before turning back to Izuku. Your soul. His heart stopped beating suddenly, making a loud noise. My soul. Are you going to eat it? Oh hell no, he laughed with a grin. To put it simply, by sunrise tomorrow, your mother will be healthy as a horse, and you will have your whole life ahead of you with a new powerful quirk. In exchange for this, I will come back to you in the future to collect the favor. You will not have to do anything complicated, I guarantee you. You'll just have to help me with something when the time comes. It's your choice, Izuku. He unrolled the scroll, giving it to Izuku. All you have to do is sign. Izuku hesitated before taking the scroll in his hands to read what was written on it. Suddenly, something cut his finger, making him wince in pain. His mind was elsewhere when he dropped the scroll, and a few drops of blood fell on it. Because of what happened, Izuku quickly picked up the phone and apologized to the man over and over again. Oh, it doesn't matter, young Izuku, the man said with a smile as he looked at the bloody signature line. This will do just fine. Izuku cocked his head and said, but I did not sign it. His face showed that he was confused. Your blood did it for you, and when you grow up, you will learn that a contract signed with blood is worth 1,000 times a contract signed with ink, said the man who put the scroll away. Now, go home and help your mother, because this is the last day where you'll see her in such a bad shape. From tomorrow she will be even healthier than before. It was so good to hear that news that Izuku forgot about the contract and started running toward his house with a big smile on his face. Suddenly, he stopped and turned around. The child stood still, confused, when he saw that the man's seat was empty and there was no sign of him. Hey, mister, what is your name? Perhaps it was just a dream. A dream? No, that wasn't real. He shook his head when he saw the cut on his finger. My mom will get better now. Then he ran toward the house, not realizing that two red eyes with a scary grin were staring at him from a distance. The next morning at Midoriya's house, as the sunlight came in through the window shutters, Izuku slowly opened his eyes and let out a long yawn. But after a few seconds, he frowned in confusion when he heard music playing all over the house. He got out of bed, put on the slippers with the All Might theme, and left the room. He went to the kitchen, which was where the music was coming from. As Izuku walked into the room, he gasped when he saw his mother sing along to the song while making breakfast with the biggest smile ever. Mom. When Inko heard his voice, she quickly turned to her son and gave him a big hug while spinning around with happiness. Good morning, honey, Inko said with a smile to her son. I have some great news for you. At his confused look, she laughed and put him on a chair. Honey, as you may have noticed, I haven't been feeling well these days, she said, putting her hand over her heart. There was something bad inside me that was hurting me, but now that bad thing is gone. Izuku's eyes got bigger and his mouth went wide. Really? Yes. I took the morning test prescribed by the doctor to monitor that bad thing and I discovered that it completely disappeared, said Inko, hugging him. Now you don't have to worry about me. I'm completely fine. Speaking quickly, Izuku looked at his mother and said, It worked. It really worked. Inko tilted her head and looked confused. What worked, honey? What? There was nothing, Mom. There was nothing, Izuku said, shaking his arms to show what he meant. I was just talking to myself. Inko raised an eyebrow, but he chose not to ask any questions because he didn't want to make things awkward. She walked over to the stove and kissed him on the forehead. Get ready, we're going shopping after breakfast. Okay, Mom, Izuku said with a smile. He didn't care what other people thought. His mother was better, that was all that mattered. According to Inko, after breakfast they went to the city center to buy some things. Izuku was even happier when he got the official diary of All Might, which had a lot of information about his heroic deeds and some of his most famous quotes. They both agreed that the idea of getting a powerful quirk from that blonde man was more interesting than everything else. Now I just need to figure out my quirk and get to work on becoming the greatest hero ever. Izuku thought this with a big smile and his hands shaking with joy. Inko tapped him on the shoulder and said, Wait a minute, honey. I'm going to get the car. Let's go home. Izuku gave his mother a nod and then sat down on a bench with his shopping bags to watch her walk down the market street. The last thing he saw of his mother was her back, just seconds before a powerful explosion ripped through a store and destroyed everything within 30 feet. The next shock wave threw him and everyone else on the ground to the ground, where he hit his head on the sidewalk concrete. As the people's screams echoed through the air, Izuku tried to get up. He was shaking on his legs, and blood was dripping from his forehead. He looked around and saw only blurry people running in all directions, mostly away from a bright light source not far away. When he turned toward that light, his vision got better, and he could see the flames that were slowly eating away at the street and the buildings. But most importantly, he saw the burned skeletons of at least 50 people. His mind flashed back to the back of his mother as she walked away from him, and tears started to fall from his eyes. Before Izuku knew it, he took a step forward, but someone grabbed him by the shirt and lifted him off the ground. He met a boy in his late teens with white hair in an instant. Where do you think you're going, kid? Said the boy. We need to evacuate the area. Are you alone? Izuku would have been happy to have just met Death Arms, one of the new generation's superheroes, but his mind wasn't able to process what was going on around him, so he turned back to look at the flames and stretched his arms out in front of him. Mom. Death Arms saw the flames with wider eyes and heard the child with green hair who had just stopped him calling his mother in a broken voice. Shit, he said, and without waiting, he grabbed Izuku and ran with the rest of the crowd toward the police sirens that were getting closer. The little kid was struggling to get away from the hero. Izuku screamed, Mom. My mom, where is she? As he rushed to the flames, where he could see Inko slowly going out of his mind. Mom. Mom. Izuku screamed, but when he opened his eyes again, his voice was different. It was hoarse and strong, sending a chill down Death Arms' back. Mom. The next morning at Jutendo Hospital in Tokyo. So you are the one who will take care of him? Yes, I arrived as soon as possible. I'm not a relative of blood, but I've filled out all the forms. You will have to sign others once he has come to live with you. Then there is also the fact of Inko Midoriya's will. Those problems can wait. I want to first make sure Izuku's okay. Fine. Just try not to do stupid things. Your criminal record is not clean and you know it well. I know. Geez, you're even worse than those cops in America. I'll take that as a compliment. Now wait, he's waking up. When Izuku slowly opened his eyes, he saw that the ceiling was white. Where? He turned around when someone put their hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, you're fine. We're in a hospital. Do you feel any pain right now? Asked a young man with black hair who was dressed like a police officer. After being still for a moment, Izuku whispered, My head. You took a bad blow to the head. Nothing serious, but the doctors say that you will have a bit of a headache for a day or two, at least if you will not be healed by some quirk. The policeman said with a smile. My name is Naomasa Tsukachi and I'm the one who brought you here urgently yesterday after Death Arms handed you over to the police. I know I ask you a lot, especially now that you've woken up, but do you remember something before you fainted? As Izuku looked at him, his face showed that he was confused. But then the memories of the day before came flooding back to him, making him hold his head in pain. A bang. And my mom, he yelled at the police officer. My mom, where is my mom? Naomasa looked at him with sad eyes because he didn't know how to tell him the bad news. He was only a child, after all. Izuku, I'm sorry to say this, but your mom is dead. She was killed in yesterday's attack by some villains. The heroes defeated and arrested them, but there was nothing to do for the people too close to the origin of the explosion. Naturally, Izuku looked like he was going to die at that moment. He was crying uncontrollably and calling his mother's name over and over again. The third person in the room decided to speak up at that very moment. Naomasa didn't know how to comfort him without coming across as cold and heartless. A young man's voice said, "You really know how to talk to a child. Come on, stand aside." As the new person sat down next to the bed and hugged Izuku, the child cried uncontrollably for a few minutes while the new person whispered something in his ear. Come on, kid. This is not the time to cry, you know? You must be strong like a hero. No, not like a hero, but like the best hero. Like All Might. He's your idol, right? Izuku was still crying, but she was able to nod once while shaking in the man's arms. The man smiled a little and then asked, "Then you'll know what makes him different from the other heroes, right?" He always smiles, Izuku said with another nod. Yes, he always smiles, because he knows he must always be strong, and those who can smile in the hardest moments are the strongest of all, said the man who was patting him. Now, I can't ask you to smile, not after what happened, but I need you to be strong. Can you do this for me? Izuku cried again for a few minutes before he could stop. The man slowly let him go, and Izuku could look him in the eye and see his blue eyes and reddish blonde hair. But the black biker jacket stood out the most. Glad to see that you're a strong kid, Izuku. He smiled at him. My name is Jonathan Blaze, but you can call me Johnny. I was a friend of your mother, and from today on I'll be your caretaker. Ohi, Izuku. Wake up, time to go to school. Once there was a low groan. Two tired green eyes opened and looked at the ceiling for a few seconds. The room was no longer quiet. Even though he didn't want to, Izuku pulled back the blanket and put his feet on the floor. He was trying to wake up by giving himself light pats on the cheeks and showing off his toned torso. Izuku was 15 years old, almost 16, and very tall for his age. He was almost 1 meter and 75 centimeters tall, and many girls would have called his body ripped. As he walked toward the window, he stopped to raise the shutters. He groaned again when the sun briefly blinded him, but he continued to the kitchen after putting his shirt on the back of a chair in his room. As he came down the stairs, he quickly looked at the pictures on the wall. They all showed Izuku as a child and Johnny Blaze, who had been taking care of him for almost 12 years. The older man had taken on many roles for Izuku, including guardian, father, friend, and older brother. Izuku was very thankful for all of these roles that the older man had played for him. A male voice laughed at him as soon as he walked into the kitchen. Well, look who decided to come out of the grave. Spent another night in the throes of your heartburns? Or did you spend the night going around on your motorcycle? Again. Izuku laughed at that, then got a coffee cup, filled it up, and sat down with Johnny at the table. The heartburns were a joke term they used for a part of Izuku's quirk that, even after 12 years, still didn't have a name or all of its effects known to them. Izuku started having severe chest pains at different times of the day, like something was burning inside him, a few days after his mother died. The pains got even worse at night. Unfortunately, no doctor could figure out where those pains were coming from or how to stop them. The pains got worse over time, which made Izuku very tolerant of pain. Even though the pains didn't hurt as much after almost a year, they kept him up at night many times. So Johnny took Izuku out of kindergarten for a whole year to make sure he was healthy. As a result, Izuku was put in the same class as Katsuki Bakugo, a child who had teased him a few times because he didn't have a quirk. They learned about another part of his quirk during their second year together, the ability to melt things, especially metal objects. Johnny was still having bad dreams about it because Izuku had melted the muffler off of a 1957 Harley-Davidson Sportster that was still in its original form. As the man screamed in pain, The whole city could hear it. Izuku had a panic attack when he saw his guardian on the ground with foam coming out of his mouth and eyes that were white. But Izuku couldn't help but laugh as he thought about what had happened. For another 2 years, they didn't learn anything new about his quirk. But one night, while having dinner with Naomasa Tsukachi, a newly promoted detective who had become a family friend, they decided that whenever Izuku had heartburns, there was a bad guy at work somewhere. They didn't know how to explain it, but Izuku seemed to know when someone was breaking the law, even if it was in a painful way. But one night, when Izuku was only 14, everything changed. Going back in time, it was 2 years ago at Johnny's motorcycle shop. Izuku let out a small yawn and turned the pages of an old motorcycle magazine. That evening, his caretaker's shop was empty, but Izuku liked going there, even if it was just to look at the magazines he had read so many times. When Izuku learned that Johnny used to be a very good stunt motorcycle rider, he wasn't surprised when he told him that he was going to open a motorcycle shop in Tokyo, but not in the city center. Instead, he wanted to put it near some homes. A few days after the store opened, he saw a lot of people asking about new motorcycles, spare parts, and other things. That put an end to all of his doubts. And everything that happened only made him want to learn more about motorcycles, which is why he asked Johnny for help. Okay. Johnny was a lot of things, and encyclopedia on motorcycles was one of them. After talking with them for almost 3 hours, Izuku felt drawn to that world. Over the next few months, he spent more and more time there learning more about motorcycles. Thanks to Johnny's secret lessons, he knew how they were made, how to take them apart, fix them, and how to ride them. All he needed was his own bike, but he had to wait until he was 16 to get one. There was a man's voice that said, "I see you've grown since the last time we met." It scared Izuku so much that he almost threw the magazine at the man. "Why you?" Izuku almost yelled as he looked at the same blonde man holding the cane and standing near the door. "Hello Izuku, it's been a while." When the kid saw him, he calmed down a bit and said, "Yeah, almost 10 years. That long? It looks like my stuff in America took longer than planned," the man said with a smile as he nodded to Izuku. "I heard about your mom's death. Please accept my deepest condolences." "Thank you," Izuku said, his eyes sad as he thought of his mother. "Are you here for the contract?" he asked. Yes and no," the man confused him. "You see, I can feel that, in the next few years, I will be forced to collect the favor with you. But I fear that coming to you suddenly might be counterproductive. After all, you have barely discovered some small aspects of your quirk." She asked, "Can you explain that? Because melting things and knowing when bad guys are acting doesn't seem like such a powerful quirk." Izuku was getting a little angry, which was understandable. "I'm sorry, but I cannot explain everything about your quirk, but I can still give you the basics." The man laughed as he tapped the cane. "You must know that you are not the only one who has signed a contract with me, and every time the quirk that I give changes in some aspects, but the base is the same. First of all, your body was too immature when you received the quirk, so it just gave you little tastings of its power. Now that I am here, I will make sure that your body matures quickly, so in a few years you will be more than ready to use it to the best of your ability." The man gave Izuku a smile, making him shudder under those eyes. "But tonight, since you had to endure that pain within you for 10 years, I will make sure that you can eliminate the source of such pain." Izuku looked at him with scared and confused eyes, but then he understood what the man had said. "Wait, who told you about my paya?" He fell to his knees when he felt a sudden stab of pain in the chest. His eyes were filled with pain, and it was hard for him to breathe. The man smiled and said, "Can you feel it, Izuku? Your power is trying to get out, and it wouldn't be healthy to keep him inside you. You must hurry if you don't want to suffer more." But when Izuku looked up, he was already gone. When Izuku finally got up, it was hard for him to reach the store's phone. But his legs moved on their own, and he ended up walking toward a nearby motorcycle, a Kawasaki Ninja 400 that was completely black and ready to go. It was on display for customers. Izuku was surprised to hear the engine start up as if it had its own life when he touched it with one hand. Before he knew it, he was already sitting on the saddle with his hands around the handlebars. The bike quickly moved off and broke the shop window. Izuku did everything he could not to lose his grip on the handlebars and closed his eyes to protect his face from the glass shards that hit him. The bike got faster and faster until it was on the edge of the residential area, right next to the industrial zone with all its factories and warehouses. Izuku then tried to turn the handlebars to go in a different direction, but the bike slid into a big warehouse that didn't have any gates. The bike then suddenly stopped, throwing Izuku forward and landing on the concrete floor with his back, knocking him out. Izuku held back a sob as his eyes closed in pain. When he opened them again, smoke came out of them, which scared him. Even though the pain was getting worse, he got up and put his hands over his eyes to try to calm that unbearable feeling of burning. To his horror, he saw that even his hands were smoking, and when he looked down, he saw that his feet were surrounded by violent flames that left flaming footprints every time he took a step forward, even though his body was shaking violently. The burning feeling spread through the body in seconds, and the pain became unbearable. Izuku screamed until he could barely breathe, and bright red veins started to show up on his hands and other parts of his body. Soon, the pain made Izuku lose it, and he started to laugh and scream at the same time. He looked helpless as his muscles were burning from the inside, and every time his hands spasmed, pieces of skin would burn off, revealing white, perfect bones wrapped in flames. His eyes were gone and were replaced by those flames. He looked around for something that could help while ignoring the fact that the flames were eating his hair and body. The pain kept getting worse, but after one last very painful spasm, Izuku stood still and looked down at the burned skin. He stood there like that for a few seconds before slowly raising his head, which was now on fire. An animal-like roar could be heard in the night. The suburbs of Tokyo. A short time later, another man with 4 arms and long black hair asked the little old man with blue skin, "Come on, old man. We just need some cash. Don't you want to do a good deed?" The old man yelled, "I have nothing to give to criminals like you," before the man with many weapons punched him in the face. A second criminal used his right forearm as a spring to hit him in the face and knock him down at the feet of the third and final criminal in the group. The third criminal looked at the man with a smile on his face. "Be nice to the old man, you know that. We young people need money, so..." He made a funny noise with his throat and spit a ball of fire that hit a trash can and burned it in seconds. "Give us your money, or you'll be in big trouble." A loud roaring sound surprised both the old man and the 3 bad guys before he could answer. 3 bad guys turned toward a tunnel nearby and saw a light getting closer and closer. They thought this was where the sound was coming from. In a matter of seconds, what looked like a simple light turned out to be a burning car that flew over their heads, making them duck down to avoid being hit. It then landed behind them, setting off a small explosion that threw pieces of asphalt and ground into the air. The 3 bad guys turned right away to where the impact happened, but the old man fell to the ground in shock, still not sure what had happened. As the smoke from the explosion cleared, a figure began to appear, and the 3 men felt fear and terror deep in their hearts. 10 meters away, there was what looked like a demon's motorcycle and the person riding it. Both of them were covered in hellfire. The bike looked like it was made of black steel all over, but some parts looked like human bones. For example, the spokes of the wheels were shaped like blades, and the handlebars were like the horns of an evil goat skull. The rest of the skull was the headlight, and flames were burning fiercely in its sockets. The engine looked like a ribcage, and 4 iron pipes stuck out from it. These pipes went all the way to the back wheel and turned into 4 mufflers with strange glowing cuts on them. Both wheels were completely on fire and had fenders on them that looked like they were made from spines, with a small, curved blade for each vertebra. But there was a skeleton on the motorcycle seat that was on fire. It was wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and red shoes. The skeleton slowly turned his head and stared at the 3 bad guys, giving them another chill. When the skeleton got off the bike, he was lower than expected but still very scary. He didn't even bother to look at the 3 men again. Instead, he looked at the scared old man who was still on the ground. When the old man understood what the skeleton was saying, he stood up and stuttered a low, "Thank you." He then ran off in that direction, leaving the skeleton alone with the 3 men. The person with 4 arms was the first to come back to life and smiled bigly. "Well, I've seen some ugly people, but you're definitely one of the ugliest. Your appearance surprised us so much that the old man was able to escape. That means you will replace him. I hope your money is safe, because we need it." The man walked up to the skeleton without waiting for an answer. He tried to grab the hoodie with one hand, but the skeleton grabbed his wrist without looking and broke it cleanly with a quick push. The man was hit in the stomach by the skeleton with a hard fist, which burned his skin and made him fall to his knees. His mind wasn't even aware of the pain. Before his two friends could help, the skeleton grabbed the criminal by the throat and forced him to look at him. He then raised his right hand and showed a sphere of fire, which he used to hit the man in the face. In an instant, the man was completely burned to death in front of the terrified other two. The other two were frozen with fear, but the second criminal ran forward, turned both forearms into springs, and then used the strength of his quirk to try to hit the skeleton from a distance. As soon as the skeleton grabbed both springs before the two fists could hit him, his plan fell apart horribly. The man tried to get free, but his frustration ended when the skeleton melted both springs, cutting off his hands. He fell to the ground screaming in pain he had never felt before as he looked at the burned stumps that were his wrists. A man was screaming, but the skeleton didn't hear him. He turned to face the last bad guy and was hit in the face by a ball of fire. The man laughed sarcastically because he thought he had hurt him, but his face turned into a scared mask when he saw that his fire had not even slightly damaged the skeleton. "You like playing with fire?" the skeleton asked him. "Let's play." The man took a few steps back and then ran away very quickly, yelling, "Stay away from me." The skeleton didn't go after him right away, but it did pick up a piece of cement from the ground that had red veins running through it. The skeleton threw the piece at the man who was running away. The piece exploded when it hit the man on the back, making him fall to the ground screaming in pain. The skeleton saw the man lying on the ground and took a few steps toward him. But then it saw a small frame. When the skeleton walked into the shop, he looked around until he saw chains hanging from the ceiling. He grabbed one of the chains and ripped it off the hook. As he walked out of the store with the chain around his fist, he saw the third man trying to crawl away while his back was on fire and what clothes were still on him were melting into his skin. The skeleton quickly got to him, and when the man heard him coming, he slowly turned around with scared eyes, just in time to see the skeleton stretch out the chain in his hands and light it on fire. Have mercy. He shackled his head and said, "Sorry, all out of mercy." The skeleton let go of the chain behind him with a wide arm movement. A small piece of the chain still wrapped around his arm. Once the man knew what he was trying to do, he tried to escape again but was stopped right away by the chain that was now around his chest. He let out a loud scream as the chain's flames started to eat him. Somebody. Help me. When the skeleton jerked the chain, the man turned into a pile of ashes that the wind spread out. He stopped screaming. The chain suddenly broke, and with a simple movement of his arm, the skeleton wrapped it twice around his chest. He then began to walk toward the bike, ignoring the man whose hands he had ripped off, who was still lying on the ground with tears in his eyes and a big dark stain on his pants. The skeleton got back on his bike and made it skid for a few seconds while pointing the front wheel at him. This made him even more scared. The man yelled, "No, no, no, no," as he tried to get up but failed. "I don't deserve to die. Everyone says that." The skeleton took off at full speed right away and never slowed down, even when the man's desperate face was only a few inches from the wheel of his bike. It was the next day at Johnny's motorcycle shop. Johnny was usually a calm, fun, and lazy person who didn't work with motorcycles. But right then, his mind was working overtime to figure out what happened in his shop. One of the windows was broken, and one of the bikes was gone. The same thing could be said about Izuku. Now was a good time for him to put up some security cameras if he didn't die of a heart attack first. He had already called Naomasa to explain what was going on, but the detective told him that the police station was a mess because of all the calls about murders that happened in the city at night. When the phone rang in the shop, Johnny took it close to his ear right away. "I hope you're okay, Izuku. If you're not, I will never be able to find the courage to look your parents in the eyes when I see them again," he thought. "Who's calling?" He heard a faint laugh on the other end of the line. "Gee, good morning." Johnny yelled, "Izuku. Where the hell are you? What happened last night? What happened to the shop? The Kawasaki? Are you okay? Someone kidnapped you?" The words came out of his mouth without him thinking them through. "I'm fine, Johnny. I'm just really tired," Izuku said, sounding very tired. "I'm outside of town in the country, and an old man let me use his phone." Johnny let out a sigh of relief. Izuku was okay, though. "Izuku. What happened last night?" Another small laugh. "You wouldn't believe me." End flashback. At first, Johnny didn't believe him, but the news about a flaming skeleton riding a demon motorcycle, several criminals being killed at night, and Izuku himself showing him some powers. Well, let's just say they were enough to make him change his mind. Of course, even though some witnesses had praised the flaming centaur, which is why reporters had called him, Izuku had taken the biggest hit when he found out that he had killed a dozen people without feeling bad about it during the night. He turned around at sunrise, but his memories were jumbled and cloudy. But as the hours went by, he remembered all the faces of his victims as they begged for forgiveness. The look on the man's face after he cut off his hands and gave him the bike was the final straw that made him run to the bathroom and throw up over and over again until his stomach was empty. Johnny had done everything he could to make him feel better, but nothing worked. Naomasa finally showed up after a while, and that's when Izuku decided to tell them the whole story, from the deal with the blonde man to the night when he turned into a body on fire. To say they couldn't say a word would have been too mild, but they lived in a world with heroes and villains, so from a certain point of view, that story could have been normal. This is a very sick point of view. It was Naomasa's plan to question Izuku at the station and record the incident as an isolated case of loss of control. But Johnny spoke up right away, saying that Izuku already had enough problems with his freak quirk and didn't need the police, heroes, or villains breathing down his neck. In the end, they chose to keep the secret because they were trying to help Izuku master his quirk. The 2-year journey had led to many successes, but unfortunately. Izuku sipped his coffee and said, "A rapist. This month you're only at 3. Johnny agreed with a bacon-filled grin. "I'd say that's a step forward." "If you say so," Izuku said with a sigh. "What's the point of being able to control this quirk even during the day if at night it acts on its own?" It was Johnny's turn to smile. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. Now get ready, because I'm not taking you to school." Izuku laughed and shook his head. He then put the cup in the sink and went back to his room to put on his school uniform. He could still remember the last night very clearly, especially the moment when he burned that rapist before he could hurt a girl. Izuku had trained for 2 years and was now able to control his transformation, which meant he could use it during the day, which wasn't possible before. This was a big problem with his quirk. On the other hand, when the bad guys got too bad at night, his quirk took over, changed him, and took him to the nearest bad guy to kill him. But Izuku didn't like killing. Instead, he liked to use a part of his power he called Penance Stare, which did not kill but put a person in a coma and made their minds suffer all the pains the bad guy had caused their victims for all time. The government even added a new wing to a Tokyo hospital where the people who were hurt by his stare were being treated. Izuku thought of the worst thing that had happened to him since the first time he changed into a different form 2 years ago. He turned into a vigilante and a scary story for kids. After the first night, when he killed at least a dozen bad guys, the police and heroes put out a call for Flaming Centaur, the name he still went by, saying that he was wanted for using his quirk improperly and other crimes related to doing justice alone. They called him a vigilante because he had only killed bad guys and not innocent people. On the other hand, that didn't exactly make Izuku feel better. After a year, he had killed 70 people, but only 5 of the criminals he had targeted ended up in a coma. On the other hand, by the second year, Izuku had mastered his quirk and killed 90 criminals, putting more than 50 of them into a coma. The Flaming Centaur's fairy tale was created in the second year to scare off bad kids at school. Izuku wasn't sure what to think of the story. Izuku cleared his mind by shaking his head. He then put on his uniform jacket and walked to the front door. "I'm going out. Johnny," Johnny yelled from the bathroom, "see you this afternoon." That's when Izuku looked at a picture next to the door. It was of him and his mother when he was 3 years old. He looked at the picture with a smile and whispered, "I'm leaving, Mom." That afternoon, somewhere in Tokyo, "What do you think about our future?" Izuku thought as he looked at the career goal sheet his teacher had given him. "If everything had gone as planned, I probably would have put my hand up for the idea of becoming a hero." People who knew Izuku well saw how much his mother's death had changed him. Before, he was almost obsessed with heroes, having a quirk and, most importantly, all might. Now, he hardly ever stopped to watch the fights between heroes and villains, and after the last 2 years, he didn't even want to be like them. It was clear that some things, like his respect for All Might, hadn't gone away, but they weren't the same either. Going to work in a factory that needed to melt things would probably be the best idea. Izuku was better at controlling that part of his quirk. After all, as many had shown, having a quirk didn't mean you were a hero. Johnny, for example, had the quirk Second Chance, which gave him the power to undo damage from accidents and other similar events once a day. This was very useful for him as a stunt motorcycle rider. He sighed and walked into a small tunnel that would lead him home, but as he did, he felt his chest start to burn. Not again. A lot of dark slime wrapped around him from behind and said, "Invisibility cloak, size L." Izuku turned his head just a little to see two big eyes and a set of teeth attached to that slime. The bad guy was talking about hiding for a while and why he was in town. Is he trying to take charge? Izuku thought, having fought an enemy like this before, months ago. The slime didn't seem to notice that Izuku's eyes and right hand were on fire. "You've been unlucky, and I don't have the patience to deal with you right now." A deep male voice yelled, "Do not worry, kid," as a manhole was thrown into the air, "because I'm here." And this time, Izuku was shocked when All Might came out of the manhole. Before he could say anything, the hero had already charged his right fist. Texas smash. All Might created a strong shock wave with just the movement of his arm. The wave threw off the slime and knocked Izuku to the ground, where he lost consciousness. After a short time, some light pats on the cheek woke him up. "You All Might? Thank God. You look like you're doing well. That's the most important thing," All Might said with a smile. Izuku was speechless as he looked at him. He hadn't yet realized that he was with his hero, the person who had inspired him the most as a child. When he looked at him, he couldn't help but think, he's always smiling. All Might, can I ask you something? According to the hero, pro heroes always have to fight against time and evil. He bowed his legs as if to jump while Izuku took a few steps forward. "That's it, I'm counting on you to keep supporting me in the future." He then jumped into the sky and reached an amazing height in a matter of seconds, but he wasn't alone. Izuku was hanging from All Might's ankles when he felt a weight on his legs. No, what are you doing? Are you crazy or something? I have to ask you something important," Izuku yelled, attempting not to slip from his hold as the wind threatened to tear off his eyelids and cheeks. It was All Might who said, "Okay, I get it. Close your eyes and mouth now." He then coughed up a few bloody drops. He tilted his body and then swooped down onto the roof of a building, though he didn't damage the roof. Izuku got down on his knees and said, "That was really creepy. It was one thing to ride a motorcycle, but it was a whole other thing to fly while hanging from a hero's ankles." He shook his head to clear it and saw that All Might was about to leave again. "Wait." Izuku asked him, "Why do you always smile?" Because he didn't look at him when he said, "No, I can't wait." "Why do I always smile?" All Might asked him, looking at him. Then he felt something strange inside him as smoke started to escape from his body and said, "Damn it, not now." "I know it sounds rude, but I wanted to know. You always save people with a smile on your face, no matter what." Izuku slowly raised his head and asked, "Years ago I wanted to be just like you. He then saw a very thin man with hollow cheeks and eyes that were sunk in their sockets. What the? You shrunk? Are you some kind of clone or fake of All Might?" After staring at him in silence for a moment, the man spoke up and spat out a lot of blood. "I am All Might." "What? Your voice has even changed. You can't be him." "It's kind of like those people in the pool who hold their breath to look bigger," All Might said in a calm voice. Izuku yelled, "This is even more ridiculous," as he tried to come up with something to say. He sighed and sat down on the roof. "That's why I always smile, huh? Well, you can see, kid. What's written on the internet isn't always true, you know. But you." All Might lifted his shirt to show a horrible scar on his left chest that was surrounded by scar tissue and stitches. "This is a wound I got 5 years ago from a villain's attack. The result? My lungs were partially destroyed and my stomach was completely removed. My face is thin and haggard, and my eyes hurt from having so many surgeries. Right now I can't work as a hero for more than 3 hours a day. That's my limit." Izuku didn't know what to think when he looked at him, but then he remembered what All Might had said 5 years ago, when you fought against Venomous Chainsaw. "They can't get me that way anyway," All Might yelled, raising his fist and then looking down. "What I just told you was never made public. Please don't tell anyone about it." When All Might looked at him again, Izuku felt the huge pressure of his gaze. The symbol of peace, who saves people with a smile. absolutely can't afford to bow down to the forces of evil. He added, "The reason I always smile and laugh is to fight the fear and pressure that crush me every time I do something heroic, as well as to give people who need a symbol of hope courage and trust." Izuku's face showed that he understood and was alarmed. Izuku just stood there and looked at the roof for a moment. I see," he said, bowing. "I'm so sorry I bothered you and found out your secret. I promise I won't tell anyone. I can say that you are a good kid, so I have no reason to worry." All Might nodded before asking, "Why did you want to know why I always smile? My fans usually want to know the secrets of my quirk and the like." Izuku tried not to shiver when asked the question and instead looked elsewhere. "When I was 4, I found out that my mother was sick with quirk cancer. I was very young and smart, so I looked into it and found that the cancer was fatal and incurable." Izuku walked up to the roof railing and looked out over the city as All Might followed him with his eyes. "I had also just found out that I didn't have a quirk, so I was desperate. But then something happened, and my mother healed within a night, beating the cancer." "Your mother was Inko Midoriya?" All Might asked with wide eyes. It was Izuku who was shocked this time. "Did you know her?" All Might nodded. "Never met, but I know she was one of the victims during a terrorist attack, about 12 years ago. I remember her name because I was one of the heroes to take care of the villains. Moreover, I remember her because, when some of her belongings were withdrawn by the police, it was discovered that she had defeated the cancer thanks to the data obtained from a medical device that she used every morning. Unfortunately, due to the explosion, it was not possible to recover the body so as to discover a possible cure. I was there," Izuku said quietly. "The last memory I have of her is her back that moves away before being hit by the explosion. I tried to get close, thinking of being able to find her, but I was stopped by death arms and then delivered to the police, and from there to the hospital where I met my current guardian. He knew you were my idol and that you had something different from all the other heroes." Izuku smiled a bit, "That you always smile. He also told me that the people who can smile in the most difficult moments are the strongest, but, despite his words, I never managed to find my real smile. Yes, sometimes I smile but never like when I was 4 and watched your old videos on YouTube." There was silence between them for a moment. Then All Might asked, "Do you hate me?" Izuku arched an eyebrow. "Why should I hate you?" "Because my mother died, and nobody could save her." He shook his head looking back at the city. "Perhaps once I hated all the heroes indiscriminately for that reason, but growing up and becoming aware of the dynamics of the terrorist attack, I realized that it made no sense to point the finger at you heroes. Nobody could know, it happened too fast. I know there is a hero, Sir Night-Eye." Here he missed the wince from All Might upon hearing that name. He can see in the future, but his power must have different non-public limits, otherwise he could have foreseen it, but it did not go that way. "You're really mature for your age. I'm sure you'll do important things when you grow up, even without a quirk," All Might told him. He then walked toward the roof door, missing Izuku's face, who was trying to correct him. "Good luck, kid, and, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about your mother." While giving him a small smile, Izuku forgot what he was going to say. "Thank you." All Might nodded, then walked out of the room and shut the door behind him. "Well, I need to hurry up and take." As the hero patted his leg, he noticed that the 2 bottles where he had kept the slime were missing. At that very moment, he saw an explosion from a window far away and thought, "This can't be true." Not far away, after a few minutes, still in his skinny form, All Might made his way to the back of a large crowd and looked at the slime he had defeated before it destroyed everything around it while trying to take a young boy's body. Other heroes tried to stop the damage but couldn't attack him. He must have slipped at that moment. It made him think of the time the boy with green hair had been hanging on his legs and forcing him to land. "I was so into what I was doing that I didn't see the time pass. What a mistake I made. It was all because I was talking to a fan. I'm so weak." He clenched his scar and said, "So sad." Anyway, someone in the crowd said, "Isn't this the bad guy All Might was after earlier?" All Might said, "Shit," and almost choked on his own saliva. All Might, seriously, do you think he will come? Shit, I've caught a glimpse of him before. No, you didn't. Well then, why is he taking so long to get here? You know I'm right here. All Might clenched his scar again, but when he looked back at the slime, he saw a green blur running toward him, which shocked him. What the hell is he doing? What in the world am I doing now? Izuku thought as he ran toward Katsuki Bakugo, the slime that had caught his classmate. He is not my friend. He picked on me whenever he could and insults me every time he speaks. Why am I taking this chance to save him? Izuku jumped over a slime tentacle and grabbed Bakugo's wrist. He then threw his school bag out of the way so the bad guy couldn't see him. The blonde boy yelled at the older boy, Deku. What are you doing here? My legs moved by themselves. I really don't understand why. Izuku replied, trying to free him. I have no reason to help you. But it will be a cold day in hell when I'll let someone die under my gaze without doing anything. The slime tried to hit Izuku with a big hand after taking the school bag off his face, but the boy saw him and raised his free arm to defend himself. The slime got a burn on the arm as Izuku glared at it. I don't care if I get in trouble, but I won't let you kill an innocent. But just as he was about to hit the slime, someone grabbed both boys by the wrists. It was All Might who yelled, well spoken. I could not have said it better. As smoke rose from his body. I was scared right now. I was scared for my life. What a shame, All Might thought as he raised his right fist. Heroes always risk their lives for the game. All could throw himself to the ground and scream, Detroit Smash. This would destroy the slime again, which ended up on the walls next to him and on the asphalt. There was a crowd around All Might right away, so the other heroes started to get the slime pieces. Izuku was working for almost 20 minutes when he ran into an old friend who was yelling at him. Death Arms yelled at Izuku, what do you think? You almost died. I can't save you every time you get close to danger. Izuku tried to ignore him. Yes, I know. Could you please stop screaming? Izuku asked, making him even more angry. Why you? At the same time, Bakugo was praised for how strong his quirk was, but he didn't seem to pay attention to what the heroes were saying. This was similar to how Izuku didn't notice Death Arm's second attack. It was a good thing that he was allowed to go home after that bad mood. At last. What a day. I hope the cameras didn't catch me. As Izuku looked down, he thought, all we need is for Johnny to scold me. He then heard a loud, hey, good for nothing, behind him, and when he turned around, he was surprised to see Bakugo standing just a few meters away. Don't tell me he really wants to thank me. He clenched his teeth and hissed, I never asked you to come help me. I didn't need to be saved. I could take care of myself, okay. I do not need to apologize or thank a quirkless person like you. He then yelled, fucking bike nerd, and walked away. It was impossible for Izuku not to spit at him. He definitely has a problem controlling his emotions, he said, shaking his head. Better go home before something else happens. I'm here, All Might. Who are you? You were surrounded by a bunch of reporters. Izuku yelled with wide eyes. All Might pointed to the sky and said, I can avoid them if I want to. After all, I'm All Bleared Might. Why don't you do something about the blood? Izuku yelled as he looked at his idol's thin body. Kid, I came to thank you and make some corrections, and I also have a proposal for you, said All Might with serious eyes. If you hadn't been there and if I didn't hear your personal story, I would have risked doing nothing, letting that poor boy die. For all that, I must thank you. As the other heroes thought about what to do, Izuku shook his head and said, don't. I did something stupid that put Bakugo's life at risk. He was yelling at him about that. At that time, no one could act. You're the only one who did something, you. A simple boy without quirk. And that really touched me. Does he still believe I don't have a quirk? Izuku wanted to cut All Might off to tell him that he wasn't really quirkless, but he let him talk out of respect. Do you know how some heroes were born when they were just students? All Might breathed deeply. They were born with the phrase, my body moved by itself. Izuku gave him a close look. The words had a lot of energy, and I could feel something moving inside him. This is what happened to you too, right? Izuku replied, yes. He was remembering some words he thought he had forgotten. Mom, I can also be a hero. I can get a quirk. Honey, I'm sure you'll do well. All Might gave the kid the most serious look he could muster. Kid, you can be a real hero. When Izuku heard those words, he felt like he had been hit by lightning. He couldn't stop thinking about the times when he was a child. His dreams were to get a strong quirk, become a hero, and look like All Might. But a more recent memory came back to him like nothing else, reminding him of how sad things really were. Izuku clenched his fists and tried to get the courage to answer him. All Might, he wanted to say a lot of things and could have, but all he could manage was a few simple words. I don't want to be a hero. With the sun going down, the street was filled with an eerie silence. His eyes were wide open as he tried to figure out what he had just heard. All Might stood still with the sun behind him. Izuku didn't look away from him because he had already said what he wanted to say. It would have looked like someone who can only talk and not act would have turned their head away. You don't want to be a hero? All Might asked again, thinking he hadn't heard right. But when he saw Izuku nod, he knew he had. Is it because you are quirkless? Actually, I'm not quirkless. Izuku confused him. True. When I was 4 years old I went to a doctor to see if I could know what my quirk was, but he told me that I belonged to that slice of people born without a quirk. On the same day I also learned about my mother's cancer. Seeing All Might's confusion still present, he said, you have revealed to me your secret, albeit not voluntarily, so I'd like to return the favor somehow. It's a complicated story, would you like to hear it? The serious look in his eyes made All Might nod. If you have decided not to want to be a hero even though you want to help, that must be one hell of a story. Izuku thought to himself, more than you think. He then used his cell phone to call Johnny and let him know he would be late and that he could have dinner without him. After the call ended, Izuku led All Might through a residential area for a short time until they reached an old, empty construction site with still used scaffolding and tools. And All Might sat down on a stack of cement bags and said, I'm all ears, kid. Izuku leaned against an iron beam. I would say it would be right to start from the beginning when my mother miraculously managed to defeat the cancer. Izuku put his arms over his chest. I do not know what data you were able to recover from the medical device that my mom used, but I do not think that, even if you were able to recover her body, someone would be able to create a cure. Why, yes, many doctors and scientists are still working on the cure using all that they can but. The pro-hero was shocked when Izuku said, my mom didn't beat the cancer by herself. Someone healed her in a night. How can you be so sure about that? Said All Might. No quirk used to cure has ever managed to cancel the effects of cancer. When that doctor told me that I was quirkless, my mother asked me to wait outside the room because she had to speak privately with him. It was at that moment that I met a man dressed elegantly. Izuku said while looking up. I do not know why, but I told him my problem and that I would never be able to become a hero. Imagine my surprise when he told me that not all quirks were inherited through the genetic code but that there were several quirks that could be passed from person to person or that some quirks could even create new quirks and transmit them. Once more, All Might was shocked. He knew about the quirks that could be passed from person to person because he had one himself, but what shocked him was that people outside of a small group of people knew about this. Who was this man? Do you know his name? As it may seem absurd. No. I do not know his name. I met him only 3 times in my life and I never managed to ask him his name. Said Izuku with a shrug. The first time was in that waiting room. I met him for the second time on the following day and I explained to him about my mother, so he asked me something that even today I struggle to believe. He looked at All Might with eyes full of seriousness. He offered me a contract. A cure for my mother and a quirk for me, in exchange for my soul, even if not literally. He told me that, in due course, he would come to me to collect the favor and that I would have to help him with something, but I do not know what. It looked like All Might guessed something when he said, you took the offer. That man gave you what you wanted most, right? As a matter of fact. Yes, I signed that contract, although not in a normal way, or voluntary for that matter. Izuku looked down with sad eyes. The next day, my mother was healed. I do not know how it was possible, but she was healed and she decided to go to the city center for some shopping. You know what happened then? The terrorist attack. Yes, as I told you, at the hospital I met Johnny, an old friend of my mother and my new guardian. Izuku said. From that day on I lived with him, slowly discovering some aspects of the quirk I had received, although I still do not know when I received it exactly. It all started when I melted something unintentionally, and from then on the situation has improved, so to speak. But then, 2 years ago, I met that man for the third time, and that's when everything went to hell. Every Might asked, "What do you mean?" The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Izuku kept quiet for a few seconds, with his head bowed and his hair covering his eyes. All Might was about to speak again when he slowly raised his head, making it burn along with the rest of his body. The blonde hero jumped up and down because he was scared. But just as he was about to run toward the boy to help put out the fire, he noticed that Izuku was calm and that the flames didn't hurt his clothes. In a short time, he saw Izuku's body being burned to the bones. All the questions that were going through his mind had only one vague answer when he looked at the skeleton that was still burning in front of him. Izuku slowly put his hand up and put 2 fingers between his teeth. He was able to make a short but strong whistle even though he had no throat at all, which confused All Might. When he heard the roar of an engine in the distance, though, he quickly calmed down. To his amazement, he saw a motorcycle covered in flames easily jump over the building site wall and land near Izuku. All Might's years of experience finally put everything together at that moment. The superhero looked at Izuku with narrowed eyes and said, "Flaming Centaur." Izuku nodded gently. "Before you asked, no. It was not my intention to make myself known for those things I've done. Forgive me, kid, but it's hard to believe. It's been 2 years since your last appearance, and your list of victims is pretty long," All Might said in a serious voice. "I get it, but my story isn't over yet. If you can, listen to me all the way through, and then you can judge me," Izuku said in a calm, but not quite normal, voice. All Might looked at him for a moment, then let out a heavy sigh and sat down again. "It may not seem like it, but I often let my emotions control me. This should be one of those times, but if you had the courage to show me who you really are, then it is only right that I listen to the end. Go ahead." "My thanks," nodded Izuku before resuming. "When I met that man for the third time, he somehow managed to unlock part of my power, saying that in a few years he would come to collect the favor. At that moment I felt like I was on fire. I had never felt such a strong pain and my body started to move on its own. Without realizing it, I took a bike that started on its own and drove to an old warehouse where I slowly began to transform into what you see now. That was the night when Flaming Centaur killed for the first time, and yet I feel like throwing up at the thought of that night." He looked up at All Might. "I had no control over my quirk. My quirk was in control and I could not stop it. I could only remember every morning what had happened during the night, the faces of those people whom I had killed without mercy. With the passing of the months, I began to control it, but only after a year I managed to reach an acceptable level, going so far as to be able to transform at will. However, even today my quirk acts alone, when the evil at night reaches certain levels. I cannot control it. I can only hope that it will not harm innocent people, but as far as I can tell, the targets of my quirk are villains and those with souls stained with blood." All Might looked at him with understanding eyes and said, "Why not get help after the first night? There are places where people can learn how to control their quirk." "It would not work. My quirk is too powerful and I was scared," Izuku said as she looked down. "I was only 14 and had just killed a dozen people. I couldn't just go to some hero and explain what happened. I wanted to become a hero too, after all. Instead, I decided to learn how to control my quirk so I could help people, but a year ago I realized that I could never be a hero and I gave up my dream." "Why? What happened a year ago?" All Might asked, his voice full of both surprise and worry. Even though it might have been his own voice, something told him it wasn't something good. "A year ago," Izuku looked back at him, and the look of that swollen head made All Might feel bad. "A year ago I almost killed a hero. Going back in time, a year ago, Tokyo's port." By riding his bike through the streets of Tokyo's port area in silence, Izuku blew out the lights of the street lamps and set fire to the few trees that were there. It looked like it was a side effect of his change, but he didn't seem to mind, at least while he was changing. That was one of the nights when his quirk took over. Anger was sparked by the fact that there were many bad guys in the area, and many of them had completely black souls. He couldn't say no to that call, and Izuku couldn't stop his own power. Suddenly, he stopped in the middle of the road next to a big warehouse and stared at it in silence. Izuku got off his bike when he heard laughter coming from inside the building. He then went up to the wall and put his hand on it. As soon as it happened, red cracks ran through the whole wall, and it fell to the ground. He kept going into the building, ignoring the damage, until he reached a big gate. Behind it, he could hear a group of people laughing. In a move similar to the last one, he touched the metal surface and instantly melted it. The people inside were scared when they saw Izuku and his flaming skull and ran away, looking for something to use as a weapon. A man with yellow skin and eyebrows that looked like lightning bolts yelled, "Who the hell are you?" Izuku didn't answer. He just looked at the people in front of him. 7 people, all with quirks and different kinds of weapons, including an assault rifle that they probably got on the black market. But what really caught his attention were the crimes that were written in their souls. Crimes like theft, fraud, murder, betrayal, rape. As sparks flew around his feet, the same man yelled, "Hey! I'm talking to you, freak." Izuku looked at him and took off the chain that was around his chest. He held it in his right hand. "Well, I don't know who the hell you think you are, but you just made a big mistake." The man charged both feet with electricity and came charging forward to kick Izuku in the head. The kick was so powerful that it only tipped Izuku's head to the right, leaving the others speechless. Izuku looked back at the man who was now walking backwards and said, "Funny. I was going to say the same thing." Before the man could do anything, Izuku threw his chain around his chest like a snake. The yellow-skinned man was literally burned to death by Izuku's violent jerk. The man yelled, "He killed Simpson. He was tall and had a gold ring on his nose." A third man with hair that looked like iron wires yelled, "You're a dead freak." And then stabbed him in the back with a knife. The man grinned with pride as he heard bones breaking, but when he pulled out the knife, he saw the blade glow red and then melt instantly, missing the side glare Izuku had sent his way. What the? He didn't see Izuku's fist wrapped in the chain hit him in the face and throw him against a wall, but his friends seen his face, or what was left of it, while he was writhing on the ground in pain from having most of his face burned and destroyed at the same time. 2 of Izuku's remaining opponents yelled, "You jerk." The first one looked exactly the same, but the other one had iron blades on his left arm instead of his right. They both tried to cut off Izuku's head, but he heard them coming and turned to grab the blades with his bare hands, blocking their attack. The bull man charged him from the side just as he was about to melt their blades. He hit Izuku in the head and threw him against a stack of crates, breaking all of them. One of the twins breathed, "That was really close." They looked at the blade that had been held and saw that the heat had bent it. As his brother was about to answer, there was a loud explosion that shook the building and knocked the 5 bad guys to the ground. One of them, who looked like he was made of mud and rocks, was the first to come to. When he saw where the explosion came from and saw Izuku walking toward them without a scratch on him, he let out a terrified scream. He yelled, "Damn monster!" and jumped on him, spreading his body out so that Izuku's whole body was blocked by a ball of mud. "Good job, Rocky," yelled the bull, "now kill him," and he couldn't finish his sentence because he saw the mud ball turn black like it was made of burned wood. Soon after, what had been his friend broke apart, revealing Izuku with his flames still alive. He didn't try to grab their blades this time, but he did puff out his chest a little as if he had just taken a deep breath. "Jay, just die already," they yelled as they tried to attack him again. He let out a lot of fire from his mouth when they were close enough. They were both burned to ashes before they could scream. After looking up from where the twins had been killed, Izuku saw that the last 2 bad guys were no longer in sight. But he felt a slight but audible click to his right, so he turned his head that way and saw the bull man holding an AK-47. He looked like the gun was too small for him, but that didn't stop him from pulling the trigger and yelling, "Die!" And before the first bullet could hit him, Izuku opened his mouth. He stayed there until the last bullet had been fired. After that, there was silence. The bull man could only press the trigger of the now empty rifle, his eyes filled with fear as Izuku slowly shut his mouth. After a second, he tilted his head back a little and then threw up all the bullets and flames that he had swallowed in the bad guy's face. The bull man could only scream for a second before the bullets and flames tore his head apart and killed him right away. Without noticing the villain's dead body, Izuku turned his attention to a spot on the other side of the warehouse and said, "You." At that moment, the last villain became visible, his body bare from taking off his clothes. He was called Guilty. Man trying to get away from Izuku yelled, "And no. Stay away from me, stay away." But the boy had other ideas. He quickly moved his arm and slashed his chain like a whip, hitting the man behind the right knee and sending him tumbling to the ground. Izuku walked over to him while getting his chain ready when he saw him screaming in pain on the ground. But a loud male voice called out behind him, drawing his attention. "Stop where you are, crazy torch." Izuku turned on himself and was hit in the face before he could see an iron brass knuckles. He took a step back and turned his head because of how hard the fist hit him. Izuku looked at his attacker again after the second he needed to keep his balance. He didn't pay attention to his own jaw, which was still attached on the right side but hanging freely. In a short time, he had a good view of the three newcomers. Two of them were staring at him with shocked looks on their faces, and the third, the person who had punched him, was staring at him with eyes that were very narrow. The second man had a strong body, a black mask that wrapped around half of his face, and brass knuckles that could be seen clearly on his fists. The other two were much less dangerous. One was a girl with pink hair who was dressed in what you might call a succubus uniform. The other was a young boy who had a black mask on his lower face and an all-might-haired hooded jacket that Izuku could hardly believe, even in his current state of mind. Izuku let those three things go for a moment and put his hand on his hanging jaw. With a loud crack, he quickly put it back in place. The two younger newcomers were even more shocked by this, but the person who had punched him seemed kind of impressed. He held out one hand and moved his index finger to the right and left, slowly shaking his head and making a sound with his throat that meant he didn't like what he was seeing. Then he turned to follow the hurt bad guy, who was still trying to get away when someone behind him put his hand on his shoulder. "It looks like you still don't get it, pretty torch," the man in the mask said, tightening his grip. "I can't let you kill that man." A younger boy asked Izuku, "Hey Knuckleduster, is it smart?" Izuku replied, "He is. I know who he is, Crawler." He hissed with a low growl. "Precisely for this reason I cannot let him kill that man. Thanks to him, in the last year more and more people have begun to hate and repudiate the vigilantes like us, as if we did not have enough problems before." He looked at the girl with pink hair. "Pop step. Go and help that guy. Even if he deserves to be beaten up properly, this time only we will take him to the police." The girl said with a small smile, "So you can think with your mind as well as your fists." She did this while Izuku was staring at her from the side. She then bowed her legs a little. With not too much force, she jumped forward until she almost hit the warehouse ceiling. Suddenly, she felt something wrap around her left ankle. In that brief moment of stalemate, she was able to look down and see Izuku holding the chain that had blocked her. Knuckleduster and Crawler's eyes were wide with shock. Crawler tried to stop Izuku because she could tell he was up to no good, but he moved quickly and hit Pop's step with such force that her body cracked the concrete floor. While the shock knocked out Crawler, Knuckleduster seemed furious. He turned Izuku around with one hand and tried to hit him again in the face, but Izuku dodged his fist at the last second and went for the man's stomach instead. As the flaming fist came at him, the masked vigilante sidestepped and hit Izuku with a left hook, which sent him several yards away. "Crawler. I know," Crawler said without pausing for a second. He then put both hands on the ground and used his quirk to shoot forward very quickly, trying to hit Izuku, who was slowly rising. His fast front kick was blocked by Izuku, who shocked Crawler with how strong he was and how well he could guess his attack. Izuku growled at the young vigilante and lifted him while still holding Crawler by the foot. He then slammed him into the ground so hard that he passed out. Izuku stopped and looked at Knuckleduster, who was running toward him. He tried to hit him with a chain link. He took a step back because the older vigilante seemed to know he was going to attack, but the chain was still long enough to reach him and cut him deeply from the left jaw up to between the eyebrows. The man grabbed the chain with both hands and yelled, "I won't let you get away with this." Because he was in so much pain, Izuku growled again and jerked the chain, which pulled the man toward him. Izuku's left hand grabbed Knuckleduster by the face and slammed him to the ground. Knuckleduster was shocked by how strong he was. Izuku looked around for the last bad guy and saw a trail of blood leading to the second exit of the warehouse. All three of the vigilantes were on the ground, hurt and in pain but still alive. Following the trail, Izuku left the three vigilantes behind. Crawler moaned in a low voice, "I can't feel my back." Then Knuckleduster put his hand on his wound and said, "Well, try to feel it again. We need to stop that walking torch." Hop Step was close by and managed to get down on her knees, though it was hard. "We need to hurry up, or that man is as good as dead." Izuku found the hurt man again outside the warehouse. The bad guy was still crawling to get to safety. He had reached a huge open area with warehouses on one side and the water, with several fishing boats docked, on the other. Without waiting any longer, Izuku moved toward him. Suddenly, something jumped out of the water, making a big column of water that landed close to him. A few meters away from Izuku, there was a tall man wearing a plain white suit with armor on his chest and forearms and an orca mask that doubled as a cape. If Izuku had his eyes, he would have narrowed them at the sight of someone much more dangerous than the vigilantes or the already dead bad guys. Gang Orca, the 10th best superhero in the world right now, looked at him with big eyes surrounded by many red rings. "So you are that flaming centaur that everyone talks about," he said as he took a step forward and posed for a fight. "You've been unlucky to find yourself in this area with me on patrol. Your string of victims ends here and now." Gang Orca charged forward at an unimaginable speed for a man his size and hit Izuku in the chest with a fist, knocking him against the wall of a warehouse and making a hole in the metal. The attack didn't hurt Izuku at all, so he jumped to the ground and yelled at his new opponent. He then threw his chain at Gang Orca, but the hero easily caught it and pulled Izuku to him with a strong tug. When Gang Orca got close enough, he made a very loud noise that sounded like an orca. It shook the ground around Izuku and knocked him to the ground. Gang Orca went up to Izuku because he thought the last attack had knocked him out. But just as he was about to attack, he saw Izuku rise from the ground, the flames around his head stronger and more violent than before. After letting out a roar, Izuku ran over to him and tried to hit him with a fist, but Gang Orca blocked it. There was a strong shock wave and more cracks in the ground after the impact, but neither gave way. Instead, they tried to hit each other again and got the same result. After the second shot, Izuku tried to attack him again with the chain, but Gang Orca dodged it and grabbed Izuku by the collar of his jacket. He then threw Izuku backwards to the ground with all his strength, making a hole in the ground. The hero then raised his fist to hit him, but Izuku spat out a lot of flames and hit Gang Orca right in the face. Gang Orca had to let him go to put out the fire. The hero growled and grabbed a water bottle around his waist. He then dumped the contents of the bottle on his head to rehydrate himself. At the same time, Izuku got up again and, after a short exchange of glares, blew out another cone of flames. Gang Orca then attacked again with his sound attack. When flames and sound hit each other, they made a huge explosion that shook the whole area. Gang Orca couldn't help but notice that the temperature around him had gotten very high after his attack was over. "TCH, it's like when I fight Endeavor. I cannot stand the heat of their flames. If this fight goes on much longer, I'm going to lose for sure," Gang Orca thought as he looked at the water behind Izuku. Maybe this will work. When Izuku moved forward, Gang Orca sped up to meet him and hit him over the shoulder, throwing him into a fishing boat that was swaying dangerously. Izuku burned down what was left of the cabin just as Gang Orca crashed into him with both hands closed like a mallet. He wasn't hurt at all. After the blow, the boat was split in two, and it slowly sank. Izuku was thrown to the bottom of the bay. Gang Orca easily followed him because he could swim like an orca. When he saw him, the flames were less bright but still there. The hero hit Izuku with his sound attack while grabbing him again by the lapel of his jacket. The attack was even more powerful because the sound traveled faster through the water, destroying part of the seabed and shaking the water above them. Gang Orca didn't mind staying under the water for a few minutes to let the sand that had been raised by his attack settle down. When it did, he saw that the fire was out and that all that was left was a skeleton. He noticed that the skeleton wasn't breaking apart like a normal skeleton would, but it stayed together for some reason. Since there was no heart, there could be no heartbeat. He must have passed out or something, Gang Orca thought as he got ready to swim to the surface. Suddenly, two skeletal hands grabbed his wrists. He turned to look at the skeleton again, but the flames that shot up again made it impossible for him to see. A voice screamed, "Surprise!" After that simple word, Gang Orca felt the water get hotter and hotter until it boiled, and Izuku's roar was so loud that it drowned out his screams. After getting over being beaten, the three vigilantes made it to the open space, but when they looked around, they didn't see anyone. Knuckleduster yelled, "What the hell happened here?" as he looked at the damage Izuku and Gang Orca had done. With a bandage on her head, Hop Step said, "Someone must have chosen to face Flaming Centaur, and I think they did not hold back." Guys, why is the sea boiling?" Crawler asked. As soon as the other two noticed, there was a loud explosion that sent several boats flying into the air and crashing into the ground or even into nearby warehouses. But what caught their attention was the person who was thrown into the air and the boats that crashed nearby. When the smoke cleared a moment later, Crawler saw Gang Orca lying on the ground with his arms and chest burned, with the worst burns being on his wrists. While Knuckleduster was saying, "What the?" someone jumped out of the water and landed near a wrecked boat. When the three vigilantes saw Izuku, they got ready for a new fight right away, but he didn't pay attention to them. He was focused on watching Gang Orca struggle to stand up. Izuku looked down and saw a big chain with an anchor attached to it. He quickly started to spin the chain over his head, making it go faster and faster. "What is he doing?" Hop Step asked. Crawler was getting ready to use his quirk when he yelled, "He wants to throw the anchor on that hero." "Gang Orca, move away." But just then, Izuku threw the anchor with all of its chains at Gang Orca, as he had planned. Since the hero had heard Crawler's screams, he knew what was going to happen. But his legs wouldn't move, so he did the only thing that came to mind. He raised his left arm to grab the anchor. Once he got a hold of the big iron bullet, his body was pushed backwards several meters, and he dug two holes in the concrete with his feet. The three vigilantes could clearly hear the sound of Gang Orca's bones breaking in his arm, even though it was very quiet outside. The hero dropped the anchor to the ground without saying a word. His arm fell helplessly along his body, leaving big black bruises where his bones had broken. Izuku looked at him for a moment and thought the battle was over. But then he saw Gang Orca coming at him with cuts and blood coming out of his mouth. Gang Orca looked at Flaming Centaur with no fear and asked, "What's wrong?" "I'm still here." Izuku growled at him, but he still wanted to end the fight, so he grabbed the chain with one hand and didn't care that the anchor was behind Orca Gang. Izuku was thinking about something else. When they were hands length apart, Gang Orca tried to hit him first, but Izuku stooped down and punched the hero in the stomach, making him vomit blood and saliva. Gang Orca, on the other hand, used Izuku's position to hit him from above with his hand like a blade and broke his left collarbone. This didn't seem to bother Izuku, though, as he hit him again in the stomach, finally making Orca fall to his knees. Izuku was now ready to end the fight. He turned to the right and saw the three vigilantes running toward him. With a wave of his hand, he created a wall of flames that stopped them. Izuku was hit by a sound attack from Gang Orca, but it wasn't as strong as the others. He was able to block it with a roar, which made even more flames around him, and then he wrapped the chain around Gang Orca's neck. Gang Orca's eyes got bigger as Izuku tightened his grip on the chain to try to choke him. He tried to loosen his grip on the chain with his only good arm, but he knew right away that he couldn't beat Izuku's strength, especially in his current state. So Gang Orca grabbed his burning skull, ignoring the fact that the flames were burning his skin, and started to tighten his grip more and more, causing some cracks to appear in the bones. Izuku didn't care that Gang Orca tried to stop him. Instead, he put more pressure on his neck. The hero did the same thing and tried to destroy his skull, but as the seconds went by, he lost strength. Eventually, His hand fell helplessly along his body, and he slowly closed his eyes with the image of a skull on fire burning in his mind. At that very moment, Izuku seemed to have a mental snap. Gang Orca lost his hold on the chain and the flames around him seemed to go out. He fell to the ground. Behind the fire wall, the three guards saw Izuku put his hands in front of his face and look at the hero's body that was lying on the ground. "What have I done?" Izuku asked in a whisper as he roared toward the sky, new flames dancing around him. The sudden roar scared Pop Step, who asked, Hey, what's going on with him?" "I don't know, but we need to," Knuckle Duster said before spotting the hurt bad guy hiding behind some boxes while trying to get away after miraculously avoiding the fight. Knuckle Duster wasn't the only one who saw his shape disappear, which was bad for him. The man turned around for a moment and saw Izuku's full attention on him. He was shaking when he heard that voice. He was able to limp faster after that, but Izuku was frustrated and no longer could wait. Izuku took the underwater rifle with his right hand when he saw it among the wrecked boat's parts and then aimed it at the man's back. "What is he doing? That rifle doesn't have any darts," Crawler asked with confused eyes. Then, to their horror, the underwater rifle burst into flames, changed shape, and took on a more evil look, with a skull-shaped end to the barrel. Before they could scream anything, Izuku pulled the trigger. A dart made of flames shot through the air and hit the hurt man in the middle of the back. He didn't even have time to scream since his whole body was burned up. The three vigilantes didn't know what to do since the bad guy was dead, but Gang Orca was still on the ground, too close to Izuku for their liking. They had to jump to the side to avoid being hit by Izuku's motorcycle, which easily went through the wall of flames and put it out. They saw the bike stop close to Izuku, who put his new gun in a holster he had just made on the side of his burning car. When he saw that Izuku had ignored him, Knuckle Duster clenched his teeth and got up, asking, "What are you?" He then yelled, "What the hell are you?" When Izuku turned his head toward them after a short pause, the cracks in his skull that were already closing up could be seen. The last one seemed to follow the path of a tear as it closed, going from his left socket down to his jaw. "I don't know." The three guards were stunned by Izuku's words, and all they could do was watch as he rode his bike away from them and disappeared into the night. Stop the flashback. All Might kept quiet and carefully watched the boy who was sitting on the ground a few yards away. Izuku changed into his human form during the hero's story. As the story went on, the hero saw different feelings on Izuku's face, mostly shame, anger, and fear. "Now I remember. When I was not in town I received a call from the government. Apparently Gang Orca had been hospitalized and his condition was critical. Multiple fractures throughout the body, third-degree burns on the chest and arms, head injury, damaged throat and so on. They told me that maybe his career was over, but he recovered within a few months and continued with his job as a pro hero. But since that day he has always avoided the port." All Might looked at the sky. "So it was you." "Yes. Do you understand now why I cannot be a hero, All Might? I have no right to be a hero. For 2 years I killed villains or sent them into a coma. I almost killed one of the best heroes in Japan, and I also wounded those vigilantes who wanted to stop me from killing." Izuku looked down. "How can I even hope to become a hero when my own quirk seems to have been created to kill? That's why I do not want to be a hero. The heroes rescue people and imprison the villains, while I ignore the innocent and kill the criminals." The two of them were quiet for a short time. Even though All Might had been through a lot, he didn't know what to say. He was pretty sure that Izuku was right. Even though he fought a hero and almost killed him, Gang Orca didn't hold him responsible because they said it was he who attacked Izuku first, and the other three vigilantes agreed. This meant that Izuku had acted in self-defense that day, but it couldn't erase the path of death he had left behind. "This is annoying," the blonde hero said in a low voice. "Technically, you are not being called a criminal, but a vigilante." Without looking at him, Izuku said, "I know. How? Certain data are classified and not public." Izuku smiled at him and said, "The detective Naomasa Tsukauchi is a friend of ours. He is one of only 3 people who knows the whole story. The other 2 are you and my guardian." All Might was shocked and asked, "He knows about your quirk? Then why?" When he was still a policeman, He took me to the hospital during the day of the terrorist attack, and from then on he became a family friend. When I told him the whole story, he proposed to take me to the police station to be able to file the case of Flaming Centaur as a isolated case of loss of control, but Johnny opposed him, and in the end they both promised to keep my identity a secret. So I would like to ask you not to get angry with him for not telling you. I know you're both great friends, Izuku said, earning a loud sigh from All Might. All right, I will not tell him anything, the hero said. Returning to the initial topic, you are not a villain. Not officially, at least, even if I fear that many people call you that, but you know, not by chance there are unofficial rankings managed by fans. You mean like the looks most like a villain ranking? Izuku asked with an eyebrow raised. Indeed, there are dozens of heroes in the world who are not welcome, but in spite of this they are heroes who never hurt anyone innocent, more or less. Endeavor is a clear example. Although he's the number 2, he is not well seen by civilians, stated All Might. The same could be said of you, in a sense. You are trying to master your quirk to avoid killing again. That is a behavior that can only be associated to a hero or a vigilante who is extremely loyal to his vocation of doing justice on his own without killing anyone. Today, while the other heroes were undecided on what to do, you acted to save that student. Probably, if I had not intervened, you would have burned that slime with your flames. But the fact remains that you have acted, not them. A person who doesn't want to be a hero wouldn't have moved a finger. Izuku looked again at the ground. Even if it were as you say, my face is well known. Thanks to Naomasa, the police never come to investigate in my area, but if I were to become a hero, the situation could get worse, and I do not want Johnny to be affected because of me. All Might couldn't help but show a little grin. See, even if you do not realize it, you think of others and their safety, but you have a point here. After 2 years of activity, all the heroes are aware of your existence, and practically all the civilians have heard something about you, so a possible career as a hero is definitely full of difficulties. But what would you do if I told you that there is a way around this problem? Seeing the confused look on Izuku's face, All Might added, Kid, there is a way for you to become a hero. When I stopped you after the accident with the slime, I wanted to talk to you because I saw something more than a simple hero in you, and now that I know your whole story, I am even more convinced of my choice. You wanted to be a hero, and now you have a huge power inside of you, but just because of that power, you decided to give up your dream, trying to control your quirk, when other people, in your place, would have used that power to gain fame in a short time, not caring for the victims on their way. Yours is a behavior worthy of a hero. All Might got up and wiped his pants. Kid, I have something important to tell you, but first I want to see how determined you are to follow your dreams. There is a famous beach nearby that has turned into a dump. If you still want to be a hero in 2 days, get there at 6 in the morning. I might have a solution for you and your problem. He then left, leaving Izuku confused as he looked up at the sky. The drive to follow my dreams, huh? There was a building site nearby when All Might picked up the phone. Someone finally spoke up and said, Nezu. It's me. I need to ask you a favor. 2 days later, dump at the beach. All Might was sitting on a fridge and looking at his cell phone without paying attention. It's 6 in the morning, and Izuku is nowhere to be found. He let out a small sigh and thought, maybe quirk has really taught him not to become a hero. What a shame, he seemed like he was made to be one. The sound of an engine far away cut him off, and he smiled as he saw Izuku park his bike before getting to him. All Might used his family name to say, Glad to see you here, young Midoriya. It was Izuku who looked at his idol and said, You said you could solve my problem. I wanted to know what it was. I don't want to become a hero, All Might. It would be impossible for me to enjoy my life if I could change it. All Might said to Izuku, This might be true, but I can give you a second chance. You've probably already heard of the UA High School, the esteemed school for heroes. Must know about it since it's close to my house, Izuku said with a nod. All right, you should know that the principal is a good friend of mine. The other day, I told him some things, and before you get mad, I just told him I know Flaming Centaur. All Might explained, he doesn't know anything about Izuku Midoriya, your guardian, or your contract. That's why I asked him for a favor. so you could become a hero by enrolling in his academy. Izuku was shocked and widened his eyes. What? I don't want to be a hero, though. And how can I go to the best school in Japan if I'm known as a vigilante? I need to say something about myself before I share my idea. My quirk is, what do you think it is, young Midoriya? All Might asked with a thought-out look. Izuku raised an eyebrow and put his hand to his chin. Well, I've been following your main website for years, and of all the ideas your fans have brought up, enhanced body, or super strength, still seem like the most likely solutions. They're both wrong, All Might said in a calm voice. My quirk isn't that easy. One for All is the name of the quirk that lets you give someone else your power. One, everyone, Izuku said over and over as he looked at his idol with awe and confusion. Yes, the person who gave you your quirk was right, there are different ways to get one. Like you, I didn't have a quirk until my teacher decided to give me one for all, a quirk that lets its owner use stored power and give it to someone else. All Might explained, right now, I am the 8th owner of One for All, and for years I have been looking for a worthy successor who could inherit this quirk from me. This is where you come in, young Midoriya. Me, Izuku yelled with wide eyes because he wasn't expecting that. Yes, I already told you that you have the heart of a true hero. Some heroes have lived up to my hopes, but none of them have ever shown me that spark that would make me believe in them until I met you. You are a young boy with a lot of power who was willing to give up his dreams so that he doesn't hurt someone who is innocent. Young Midoriya, despite the horrible things you saw, the pain you felt, and the sacrifices you made, your heart never stopped beating for justice, All Might said, opening his arms. A lot of people I know would have gone crazy if they had the power you do, but you didn't use it. You fought against the darkness inside you and tried to keep it in check. For what? To help people who were in trouble. You young Midoriya, what was that? All Might jumped down and turned into a superhero. He then smashed the fridge with one hand to show the sun rising. A real hero would do that. Not for fame, money, or success, but because they want to help. In a yell, All Might told Izuku, now, as I already told you, you have shown that you have the heart of a hero, but your mind won't accept it because of your quirk. There's someone like you who could be the next One for All, but I know you would never take that kind of power, which is why I want to help you with your current quirk. Do you want to help me? Izuku asked with wide eyes. Certainly. You're not in danger, but you still need help to learn how to use your power. Heroes help people who are in need. All Might yelled as he shrunk back down. Young Midoriya, I can't make you do anything. I would never do something like that, but I still want to help you, and if I'm not enough, there's a reason why high school is the best place to learn, and teachers are there to help you master your quirk. Izuku looked at him for a moment and the expressions on his face showed a range of feelings. Finally, he asked, why? The question, why what? Seemed to surprise All of Might. Why do you need to do all this for me? I know that heroes always help people in need, but I'm just a regular kid. Who knows how many other people would have done the same thing I did yesterday? They are probably all worthy of your power. As far as my power is very dangerous, there are other people out there who may need your help, Izuku said with confusion in his eyes. So why me? I won't lie to you, All Might said after a moment of silence. I feel compelled to help you because you remind me of myself when I was your age. That and I see a successor for One for All. For the record, I didn't have any quirks. However, the woman who became my teacher saw something good in me and worked with me to get stronger. The sign of peace. Izuku looked into his eyes and saw that All Might had just said something very important. He sighed and shook his head. All Might, I can't take that power. Say what you want, but I'm not worthy. After what happened, I can't become the new symbol of peace or something like that. I'm sorry. I see, All Might said with a sigh. Well, I won't make you change your mind, but my offer to help you is still good. The test to get in will be in 10 months, and I'm sure we'll have made some progress by then. You talk about it like I wanted to take that test, Izuku said with a raised eyebrow. I know what you think, but you need to know that every year the people who grade that test are all heroes, and many of them work at UA, to be teachers. The judges look at everything during the exam and, whether you pass or fail, they will report what they saw to the other heroes. If you make a good impression, I am sure that the public opinion about you will change, All Might said, pointing at everything. Try to become a hero. That way, you can show them that you want to help. It works out well for you both. Izuku looked like he was thinking about it. In fact, things were going really well for him. All Might would help him master his quirk. He still couldn't believe Ida, and he could show that he wasn't just a killer during the exam, even if he failed. It was All Might's words that I should forget what I did, but I'm not going to. I will remember what he taught me, but I'm going to fail the exam on purpose. From what I've heard, it's just about destroying robots, so I'll only destroy a few of them. Izuku nodded and looked at his idol. I accept. All Might smiled at him and said, okay, you should roll up your sleeves in this case. 10 long months are ahead of us. Johnny's house 10 months later, the day of the test. Johnny looked at Izuku and said, you could always become a model for a stylist or painter. Izuku glared at Johnny and said, hey, you always need to have a plan B, right? You look great for that part, and I can already picture a bunch of girls ready to jump at you as soon as you leave the house. Izuku sighed and shook his head. Johnny was right. For the past few months, Izuku had trained every day with All Might to improve both his body and his control over his quirk. Both had worked out great, maybe even too well, as Izuku now had the body of a professional swimmer, if not better, and his control over his quirk was almost perfect. He still couldn't stop it at night when the evil got too strong, but he had only killed a dozen people in the last 10 months, which was clearly a good result. He sighed again and put the dirty dishes in the sink before getting ready for the test. His simple outfit was a black leather jacket, black pants with an inverted U on the chest, his favorite red shoes, and black fingerless gloves. Izuku was nervous as he put the uniform in his backpack. Ever since the first time he changed into a flame, he had tried to hide his identity. He didn't know how people would react to his fiery appearance, so he made a plan for what to do in case something went wrong. On the spot, he put a black mask over his face that covered from the nose down and a sleeveless hoodie under his jacket with the hood pulled down over his face. Izuku closed his backpack, said goodbye to Johnny and the picture of his mother, and left the house on his bike. The engine started with a loud roar, and Izuku rode the bike toward UA High School. When he parked the motorcycle near the entrance, he seemed to get a lot of strange looks, probably because of how he got there. Right, most of them are younger than me, so they don't have licenses yet, Izuku thought as he looked around. Get out of the way. Get away, or do you want to die? Yelled a voice behind him that he knew all too well. As the blonde walked toward the door, Izuku whispered, Bakugo. This made other people move, even though many of them knew Bakugo from the slime incident. Luckily, Izuku hadn't been caught on camera that day. He shook his head and took a step forward when someone slammed into him from behind, surprising him. Ow, I'm sorry, a female voice said, I wasn't looking. While she rubbed her nose and said sorry, he saw a girl with brown hair and eyes that were the same color. There was no need to say sorry, Izuku said with a small smile that was hidden by his mask. Are you also here for the entrance exam? Oh yeah, again, I'm sorry for the trouble, but I was really nervous and didn't see you, the girl said with a nod. She then thought, and this shows how nervous I am. He's pretty tall. Yes, I see. The opening ceremony is about to begin, so it would be best to go in. Izuku said, good luck with the test, and then he walked into the building, following the crowd until he reached a huge hall with many seats. He sat in one of the middle rows and half closed his eyes, waiting for the test to start. It did, but it was too soon and too loud. Hello everyone, and welcome to my live show. I will give you a quick explanation of how this exam will work. Yelled a man with blonde hair and sunglasses. Are you ready? After hearing the rules, Izuku thought, so Present Mike works here too. I guess all the teachers at this school are pro heroes. But then a guy in glasses spoke up and said that a handout showed 4 types of villains, not 3 as Present Mike had said. He then turned to Izuku. Also, what's wrong with you? Yes, you, boy with curly hair. I saw you coming with a bike before, the boy with black hair pointed at him. That means you're older than us, but you're taking the test. Does that mean you've been turned down before but still want to take the test? You should quit school right away if you think it's just a way to kill time. Izuku gave him a mean look and said, "You're lucky I'm not here to cause trouble, or you'd be on the ground with your hair completely burned." After that small incident, Present Mike went over the last few rules of the test, including the enemies that were worth no points. He then led all the test takers to the changing rooms, where they could put on their uniforms and gear, and then split up into several buses that took them to their assigned site, which looked like a small town. It looks like everyone is pretty calm, Izuku thought as he made sure that his mask and hood covered his face well. He looked around and saw the girl who had just run into him taking deep breaths. Well, maybe not everyone, he thought. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to find out who among us has the worst concentration, right? I'd like to know your name. You're not here to get in the way of our test, right? As I already told you, just because you lost a year doesn't mean you're better or more likely to do well on this exam, the boy with glasses said with a glare. People nearby started to whisper that Izuku didn't have to be very strong since he had lost a year, making him one less competitor on the test. So they think they're lucky to have me as an opponent, huh? Izuku thought with a sigh. Well, it's time to show them they're wrong. And in an instant, he was engulfed in flames that burned off all of his flesh and skin, leaving only a flaming skeleton who took off his mask and hood and looked at the pale boy in front of him. He whistled with 2 fingers between his teeth without thinking, and in a few seconds, all of the examinees could hear the roar of an engine coming up the gate they had just come through. To their horror and fear, they saw a burning bike coming toward their group, forcing them to move. It stopped next to Izuku, who got on his bike with surgical calmness and then looked back at his opponents. Do you still think you're lucky to be up against me? Asked Izuku, and no one had the courage to answer him until the bespectacled boy could stutter, F Flaming Centaur. Before Izuku could hear Present Mike yelling, on start, he said, in the bones. While everyone else stood back to look at the tower where Present Mike had screamed, Izuku sped toward the middle of the city, pulling out the underwater rifle he had earned in his fight with Gang Orca. He fired 3 darts at 3 robots worth 1 point each, then moved on to the robots worth more points, but the other examinees quickly caught up to him, stopping him for a moment at 22 points. Izuku thought to himself, this is enough. Now I just need to find a place to wait. It would be better to go to less crowded areas. As he looked around, he saw a robot that was damaged but could still be fixed. Since he had nothing better to do, he walked up to it and began to study its engine. The room of judges at the same time. So that's the famous Flaming Centaur, right? Why does he not seem so dangerous? Asked a voice that was looking at a screen. Another hero to his right laughed and said, go read what he did to Gang Orca, and then we'll talk about it. Wait, is he looking at the engine of that robot? Does he know that he has 4 minutes left? Asked a funny female voice, while a strange white animal sat on the left and looked at All Might's skinny body. Toshinori, are you sure about this? He looked at the screen and said, yes. The blonde hero then added, I'm sure his hero spirit will surface during this exam. Another hero said, well, the time is almost up, so it's time to start the real test. He then pressed a red button, which set off a few small explosions in the middle of the fake city. Soon before fake city Izuku's exam site, there was a loud sneeze, and Izuku spat a fireball that hit the robot he was studying and melted it. Damn it, someone is talking about me somewhere, Izuku said with a low growl. I bet it's Johnny. A few explosions far away stopped him in his tracks, and before he could figure out what was going on, he found himself in the shadow of something very large. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a huge robot with one hand on a building, and Present Mike's words came back to him. Izuku thought, that thing is the 0-point villain. As dozens of examiners ran past him, trying to get as far away from the huge gimmick as possible. They certainly know how to scare people. Better to follow the crowd since destroying that robot doesn't make any sense since it's worth 0 points. But as he got on his motorcycle, he heard a faint moan of pain behind him and turned around to see the girl with brown hair on the ground with one foot blocked by some debris. Is she sick? No, she was fine before the test. It must be a side effect of her quirk, Izuku thought as he saw the sick look on her face. Why is she not using her quirk? From what I've seen, she can undo the gravity of the things she touches. If Izuku looked away from the other examinees, he saw that they had all seen the girl in trouble but had not stopped to help her. They were all running away, even that annoying boy with the glasses. Izuku's hands tightened slowly on the handlebars of his motorcycle, and the engine made a sound like a demon growling. It's sad that they want to be heroes but run away like cowards when they see a bad guy who is stronger than them, and no one tries to help that girl. Izuku thought as his flames slowly melted the asphalt around him. As the ground shook, Izuku turned his attention back to the robot coming at him, likely to catch the fugitives. On its way, though, there was still the girl who was stuck. He let out a loud snort, turned the bike around, and headed for the girl, grabbing the chain around his chest. When he got close enough, he whipped the chain around and hit the objects that were blocking the girl, freeing her right away. Before she could figure out what had happened, he let go of his chain, wrapped it around his chest again, and grabbed her by the collar of her sweatshirt with his free hand. "Do not use your quirk no matter what," he yelled as he put the girl on the saddle of his bike, which then sped up on its own, moving them away from the robot that had already raised its hand to crush them. Before being crushed by the robot's huge hand, Izuku thought to himself, well, it's time to get to work. The impact shook the ground and sent up a huge cloud of smoke, but that didn't fool the robot. To be more specific, it didn't fool the different sensors that were built into its body or the thermal vision that was built into its eyes. The data it was receiving was definitely alarming. Before the robot could do anything, its right hand exploded in a ball of fire that burned its arm up to the middle of the forearm. It quickly lifted what was left of its limb to contain the damage, but it didn't notice that a chain was stuck in the arm's circuits. When it raised the arm all the way, Izuku was thrown into the air above the robot. He let go of the chain so as not to break it and looked down at the robot's head. When Izuku stopped rising, he started to fall toward the robot, making a lot of flames that wrapped around his right arm in a spiral. If he still had lips, he would have probably grinned at the idea he had. While Izuku trained with All Might for 10 months, the hero taught me about One for All and the attacks that he and some of his predecessors had made. Izuku didn't have that quirk, but that didn't stop him from getting ideas for his own attack, which was his way of thanking the hero for his help. When Izuku was about to hit the robot in the head, he swung his right arm backwards and focused all the flames in his fist. When he was just inches from his target, he hit it hard and yelled, "Hell smash!" Izuku let out all of his flames inside the robot as it hit the ground. The robot's body quickly changed from dark green to brilliant white, and then it was destroyed by a series of violent explosions from the inside. The last explosion completely destroyed the robot, but Izuku had already jumped down and landed on the ground without any problems, leaving several cracks around him. When Izuku looked in that direction, he saw his bike coming up behind it, with the girl still sitting on the saddle. If possible, her face was even greener than before. He laughed quietly as he walked toward the bike and stood next to it, ignoring Present Mike's voice as he yelled that time was up. Izuku stood back and said, "Looks like it's really over." He then let the girl run behind a piece of cement and throw up her breakfast and maybe something else. Izuku shook his head and adjusted his mask and hood before changing back into a human. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder and asked, "Are you okay?" She had just finished throwing up. "Uh-huh." The girl looked at him in confusion before nodding slowly. "Why yeah. Thanks for saving me, Flaming Centaur? If you want to call me that," Izuku said with a laugh. "You should see a doctor now that the test is over, just to be safe." We walked toward his bike before hearing him say, "I'm sorry." He raised an eyebrow at the girl and asked, "What? Sorry. You could have achieved more points if not for me," the girl said with worry on her face, but Izuku waved his hand and shook his head no. "No trouble." The boy told them, "I'm not mad, and failing this test won't change my life, so don't worry." He then got on his bike and said, "If you get in, good luck with your career." She didn't have time to say anything else before Izuku put his hands on the bike's handlebars and left. Soon, many of the examinees were coming to see what had happened, and as he got closer to the gate from which he had come, he couldn't help but sneeze again. Izuku thought, "Damn it. I wonder who is talking about me." If it's still Johnny, now is the right time to burn his helicopter's wheels. He didn't know that in a room at the UA, a group of heroes, especially All Might, were cheering and smiling. 2 days later at Johnny's house, Izuku was concentrating on putting his Kawasaki's drive chain in the right place when the garage door opened unexpectedly, revealing Johnny standing there with a white envelope in his hands. "There's a letter from the US for you, high school," Johnny said as he gave Izuku the envelope. "I wonder what it could be." Izuku picked up the letter and thought, probably a thank you letter for taking their test or something like that. He then walked toward his room on his bike, ready to take a shower. But first, he wanted to see what was written in the letter. Izuku thought to himself, All Might hasn't contacted me in a while. He's probably not happy with how I did on the test. I hope he's not offended. He opened the envelope and found a piece of paper inside along with a strange metal disc. The disc fell to his desk, and a holographic screen appeared in front of him, showing a close-up, maybe too close, of All Might smiling at the camera. "Am I on the screen? It took some time to get this done, so I'm sorry I wasn't able to get in touch with you sooner," the man yelled as the camera moved away to show the hero in full. He bowed and then looked back at the camera. "I guess we'll be seeing a lot more of each other now that I'll be working at the UA. He'll be a teacher." Izuku wondered as he broke out in a sweat while All Might and the camera operator talked about post-production. All Might said in a serious tone, "Back to the main topic, you behaved very well during the practical test, but with only 22 points, you obviously failed the exam." Izuku sighed because he knew that was true, but it wasn't nice to hear someone like All Might say it. "Wait, there's more." After hearing those words, Izuku looked at the holographic screen while All Might showed him another screen. The girl with brown hair that Izuku had saved from the giant robot was on that screen. "Excuse me. Hello. This little girl asked us directly for help as soon as the test was over. Why do you ask? This is why. Sorry to bother you, but do you know the boy in the mask, hoodie, and dirt bike?" "Oh, I see. Flaming Centaur?" the girl asked Present Mike, who was standing there. He thought to himself, "That's me. No surprise here." Izuku raised an eyebrow and didn't get why All Might was showing this to him. "Could I give him some of my points?" The question shocked Izuku to his core. "Wait a minute. He saved me, but he didn't get any more points." "Oh no, don't tell me. Please give him back the points he lost because of me." No, much more than any quirk," All Might said again, this time looking at the camera. "It was your actions that moved the judges." He crossed his arms in front of him and added, "And they were looking at more than just smashing some robots for points." Izuku was more than a little pale after he figured out what the test was about. "Did you think there would be a school for heroes that wouldn't let someone in because they did the right thing? Please don't think that. Do you think it's cheesy?" He smiled even bigger at the movie camera. "That's fine with me. That's what the job says. Putting your life at risk to do stupid things." All Might showed a different screen with a ranking that had 3 columns. The examinee's name, villain points, and rescue points. Izuku's face turned even paler when he saw that his name was at the top of the list, with 82 points, 22 villain points, and 60 rescue points. "Well done, teenager Midoriya. You did well. From now on, UA," All Might said with a smile and a nod. "Hero Academia will be yours." The projector then turned off by itself. He slammed his head on his desk and let out a loud groan after a minute of silence. This is not possible. His guardian Johnny was looking at him with a small smile and 2 champagne bottles in his hands, saying, "SSSSSO," in a funny voice to his left. Izuku side glared at the stranger, who was Johnny. Or Saka diaresis. For the same reason, but in a bad way. "I'll burn the wheels of your customized Harley-Davidson panhead." Izuku glared at him for a few seconds. Johnny turned pale right away. "You wouldn't dare." Izuku didn't say anything and went to the bathroom. Izuku, please answer, you wouldn't do that, right? Right, Izuku?"
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.